What a day it was. October 15th, 2024, a day that will live on in NFL trade history. We're going to break it down from a fantasy perspective tonight and so much more. Welcome in to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and being joined tonight by one of the co-hosts of the Fantasy Empire podcast. I'm Player Profiler. You also know him from FTN Fantasy, Nelson Sousa at @the_franchise12, 2016 FFPC main event co-champion, and my goodness, just a slew of high stakes winnings over the years. Nelson, welcome in.
Thank you for having me.
I just, I had the show kind of built, and then I'm realizing, God, we got to lead things off with Davante Adams. Now we got to add in the Cooper thing. Now we got to add in the Akers thing. I was just saying right before we went to air, I feel like I need to constantly be refreshing X tonight to see if there's any more trades that go on. But to your point, Nelson, which you said right before we went on, this is awesome. This is great for fantasy, man.
No, this is exciting. I mean, NFL is probably one of the most boring sports when it comes to trades, right. Especially like at the trade deadline. There's so many other and I think of like MLB and even hockey and basketball. There's so many trades that go on, and with the NFL, they just seem, with the salary cap and different things, it's fun, especially when it's like big name players, right? With Adams and Cooper.
And I mean, Akers to a certain extent too, I think is interesting. Well, I'll tell you why it's interesting in a little bit. We have so much to get to tonight. Nelson and I are going to go around the NFL. We're going to talk about all the trades that went down today. We're also going to give you an FFPC waiver wire preview. Normally this show doesn't air until Thursday, and we'll still do a Thursday show this week, but we're doing an extra one on Tuesday because I won't have one for you next week. So this is cool that we'll be talking about the waiver wire, who Nelson is projecting to go for the most money, who might go for very little money. We'll get into that as well. We'll build an FFPC weekly challenge lineup, and we'll go through a bunch of starts or sits, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and tight ends. That is all on the menu tonight before we bid you adieu and let you go enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Play the FFPC weekly challenge right now. MyFFPC.com, 10 or 12 players if you want to play with kickers and defenses, or if not. No draft, no salary cap. You're just submitting whatever players you want. No stacking, one player per NFL team. It's the same setup as our world famous FFPC playoff challenge. You can play for as little as $35, go all the way up to winning $2,500, myffpc.com, or simply scan the QR code that is located on the bottom of your screen right now that our producer, Matt Deutsch, has put up there. You can scan that. It'll take you right to there. You can build your lineup while we're talking fantasy football tonight. And without further ado, Nelson, let's get into it. The Davante Adams saga is over. He is now a New York Jet, reunited with Aaron Rodgers in exchange for a conditional third-round pick that could become a second, heading back from the Jets to the Raiders. Let's analyze the Jets portion of this so far. Davante Adams and Garrett versus Garrett Wilson. Obviously, you're starting both of these guys every week that they're healthy, but who is going to be the alpha here? Is it just going to be Adams because of the relationship that he's had with Rodgers, or does Garrett Wilson factor into this? Wilson has been getting a lot more targets from Aaron Rodgers lately. How does Adams affect Garrett Wilson and vice versa?
Well, I mean, Wilson, I think, was like leading the NFL in targets, right? So, that's going to have to come down. With Adams there's just no other way, around it. I think Wilson's going to have to be more efficient with the targets that he is going to get. I also think that helps in terms of, probably a little less attention on Wilson. But again, he was already getting a heavy dose of targets. So I don't worry too much about in terms of like, he's not going to get double teamed or whatever. I don't really think that was really happening before. I think it's wait and see in terms of if there's actually going to be an alpha, or if it's just going to be those two guys are just going to have to coexist, and Rodgers is going to go to whatever guy, is open each week.
And when it comes down to that, both of these guys can be fat and happy, right? Both of these guys can eat. Both of these guys are going to do numbers. A rising tide raises all ships. This is good news for Adams, and it might even be good news for Wilson, and for sure is good news for Davante Adams. What about Tyler Conklin? What does this do for him? a guy that I don't know how you felt about him, Nelson, but I kind of liked him as a low end tight end 1, high end tight end 2 this season. Now I'm wondering if he's, the last 3 years, I think he's gotten 60 plus catches every single year. Now I'm wondering it's going to be a struggle to get there for him.
So with these two guys, they're going to command 25% plus of target share. So I just think like all the secondary pieces, Lazard, Mike Williams, Conklin, I think all the, any type of value is gone. I really don't know if they're really, viable just because of the impact of Adams, the connection, the history with Rodgers. I think, it's going to be too much to overcome. Lazard had been doing pretty well. Conklin had been doing really well for a lower end tight end. But I think, unfortunately, that's the end of the road for those guys.
Yeah, I think that when it comes down to it, this becomes an offense. And I think, do I have this on the show sheet? I may not. Let's bring up no, I do have it on the show sheet. We'll get back to it in a little bit. But as far as the passing offense goes, it comes down to Rodgers, it comes down to Adams and Wilson. After that, to your point, I think you really got to take, some of these guys are going to be cuttable at this point. Mike Williams for sure is going to be cuttable. Yeah. And then these other guys are going to be buried on benches until, the opportunity presents itself because of injuries or because of bye week issues. This wasn't, let's flip it around. Let's talk about the Raiders here. Brock Bowers to the moon. Obviously, this guy is going to get more targets than he knows what to do with. I think Jacoby Myers falls into that category as well. What about the other Raiders pass catchers? In the wake of Adams departing, are you excited about anybody else there, either as a bench stash or a guy who might be looking at, in a good matchup, a flex play for you?
Well, Eric, let's hold that thought for 1 second. I want to get back to the Jets.
Okay.
Because we didn't touch base on Breece Hall. And a lot of Breece's fantasy value comes from the receptions out of the backfield. And I wanted to get your thoughts on it, actually. So I'm going to turn it on you a little bit.
Yeah.
I have my opinion of how this impacts Breece, but wanted to get your thoughts because we didn't touch base on that.
Well, and I think, what goes into this conversation, this is what I was going to ask you about too, because before last week, we were talking about like almost a 50-50 split in the backfield, right? With Braylon Allen and Breece Hall because of how much Allen was being used. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that one of those games was a Thursday game where I think they wanted to save the wear and tear on Hall a little bit. So that would explain that. But it was getting closer and closer. Allen also got in the end zone last night. It was called back because of holding, just like 70% of the other plays in the game last night. But when you look at Breece Hall, the conversation to me has to include Braylon Allen. Now, this trade with Adam, or to get Adams in, I noticed this a little bit last night. Breece Hall was open several times on checkdowns, but Rodgers chose not to, instead pumping the ball downfield to Lazard and Garrett Wilson. And I'm almost wondering if that's going to be a recurring theme where Hall is ready, he's ready to take it, but because Rodgers is confident in himself, he's confident in his receivers, he obviously has a rapport with Adams. I wonder if this does take away from Breece Hall's targets a little bit.
Yeah, so I think it's going to take away from his targets, but it's going to benefit him in the run game because I don't think he's going to see any type of stacked boxes. Defenses are just not going to be able to play the Jets that way. So there's going to be more running room. But, the game that we play, in fantasy, it's PPR. And that I think that's going to sting a little bit. Hopefully I'm wrong because I have a decent amount of Breece Hall shares, but, just trying to look at it from an unbiased, opinion. And, I think it impacts, these guys. It's like a yin and yang. Like I think there's a positive to it for Breece and then there's the negative to it. So yeah. I kind of agree with you that I think it's going to, Rodgers going to be looking like he's going to have confidence that Adams or Wilson are going to get open and he's not going to want to, be checking down.
And Lazard too is another guy too that I know, say what you will about him, but this is a guy that has the confidence and the trust of Aaron Rodgers. And if these guys are all running stuff downfield, it's nice for Hall in the fact that the defenses are going to loosen up. But what do they say? Like one catch is equivalent to 2.5 carries. That's a lot of carries to make up for Breece Hall if he's going to come out as a net here in getting those targets. Let's talk about the Raider side of it.
Yeah.
Brock Bowers, yes. Anybody else?
I think Tucker and Myers, obviously, they should. It didn't work out last week. I don't know what happened really. With Tucker, I was watching that game. He just really didn't get involved in that game. You would think that with Myers out and Adams, but it's definitely, this offense is going to be built and revolve around Bowers. So he's the clear winner, I think, of the whole group of guys. And moving forward, I think he was already in the conversation, but I think he's like the clear cut, like tight end one moving forward.
Yeah, it's going to be an insanely, as long as he stays healthy, it's going to be an insanely productive year, not only for Brock Bowers, but everybody who invested in him in fantasy drafts where he was going as the 8th, 9th, 10th tight end off the board, especially in FFPC formats. They are loving life right now. 9 catches, 71 yards on 10 targets last week for Brock Bowers. Moving on to the AFC East. We're staying in the AFC East. We're talking Jets. Let's talk Bills, because they are now the proud owners of Amari Cooper's skill set into their offense, now catching balls from Josh Allen. It is Amari Cooper and a 6th-round pick this coming year going to the Bills in exchange for a 2025 3rd-round pick and a 2026 7th-round pick going back to Cleveland. Clearly, Cooper is now going to be the number 1 target in this offense once he gets acclimated. I hesitate to say that any of the Bills receivers are necessarily losers in this deal, Nelson, because I don't think any of them, maybe Shakir to a certain degree. But Samuel and Keon Coleman, these guys, they have not been consistent enough to be even weekly flexes in the FFPC. So I don't think they're necessarily a loser, but just when it seemed like Dalton Kincaid was starting to get going here, now he might stop or at least slow down again with the addition of Cooper.
So here's my take on that. I think the Bills, and I want to say after a couple of weeks into the season, it became glaring that they were in need of a wide receiver 1. None of those guys were going to emerge. And I just don't think that Shakir actually is that good. Or good enough to be a wide receiver 1. So getting Cooper, I think, is a great trade for Buffalo overall. I actually think that it might help Kincaid because it just gives a clear number 1 on the outside. Defenses can't really focus so much and draw attention to Kincaid. I think it hurts all the other receivers. And I think just it helps Allen and the whole offense as a whole. But Cooper, listen, at the end of the day, like for Cooper, this is like a win-win. It couldn't get any worse for Cooper, right. But he did look like he was slowing down a little bit in Cleveland. And I know a lot of his lack of production has to do with Watson and how bad he's been, but he also, himself looks a little bit like he's slowing down. So I would say that like this is going to be way better for him. And I think that it's good for the offense in general. But like Coleman, all these guys are just, I think, are going to be worthless at this point.
Amari Cooper, this is his age 30 season. We often see receivers start to slow down a little bit in their early 30s, and you say, well, he's only 30. You'd think that this wouldn't happen soon. He came into the NFL super young too, which is another thing to keep in mind. Now, that said, I think I'm picking at nits a little bit here when we talk about going from Deshaun Watson to Josh Allen. Nelson, when the FFPC stopped holding drafts the Sunday morning of week 1, the ADP for Amari Cooper in the main event was wide receiver 31 at the end of the 5th round. Had he been on the Bills at the start of the season instead of coming into week 7 on the Bills, how high do you think players would have drafted him?
He would have been going end of the 3rd round.
Wow. So this is significant. This is really significant for his stats and for Josh Allen's.
Yeah, I think so.
The Cleveland Browns without Cooper now, you're looking at David Njoku. I guess Jerry Jeudy, it's just weird. There's a player they just have not been on the last few years. So, he would stand to be doing some fantasy damage for people out there. But as long as Deshaun Watson's still at quarterback, I just, from a week-to-week standpoint, I never know what to expect from this team.
In order for this offense and for any of these guys really to have any sort of value moving forward, we need Jameis Winston at quarterback.
Yes.
I think Watson's done. I think he's washed. I've seen enough of him, and I've never been really a Judy fan. I have some shares this year, and I don't have really any. I haven't had any hope for him in turning into anything that is substantial. Now with Cooper gone, you would think that he's going to command more targets. He becomes the clear-cut number one, but I don't know. Not with Watson at quarterback. I don't know. And then Njoku, I don't know. I don't know if this offense really, if it moves forward, it needs a quarterback change.
This could be one of those things where you take Cooper away, maybe the whole offense just becomes irreparably broken, as it were. And what's to say? Can't you just go up to Deshaun Watson and say, "Hey, we're still going to pay you. You're going to get every dime." Can't we just say you're hurt with something so we can dignifiably place you on, put you on short-term IR or even IR for the season just to get Winston in there. I listened to Stefanski talk on Sunday. To me, this is a guy that the decision is not in his hands, and he has to play Watson because of the contract, which stinks because we are going to get middling fantasy performances from all these players until, like you said, we have a quarterback change. Is there anybody not named Jerry Jeudy that's a receiver on Cleveland that is worth picking up or holding on to?
I'm debating whether to cut Jeudy.
Wow.
Never mind trying to find, Elijah Moore or Cedric Tillman.
Right.
Those are the guys that come to mind that it's like, oh, okay, who's the next man up? This is exciting. Not with Cleveland, man. Like, I need Winston at quarterback, and then I can feel a little bit of excitement and feel like, okay, you know what? Cedric Tillman's a sneaky ad, Wednesday night. Let's pick him up for a couple of bucks and see what happens. But I just don't have confidence in the offense right now.
The third trade that came up shortly before we went on the air tonight, Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network reports that the Minnesota Vikings have acquired running back Cam Akers and a conditional 7th-round pick in 26 from Houston in exchange for a conditional 6th-round pick in 2026 as well. This is the second year in a row Minnesota has traded for Cam Akers, who has 40 carries, 147 yards, and a touchdown on the season. My immediate concern was, even though he was practicing yesterday, which was it's kind of like an extra practice that the Vikings threw together coming off the bye. My concern is, okay, what does this mean for Aaron Jones, who left with that hip injury? Why is Minnesota going out and trading for Cam Akers? Is my level of concern for Aaron Jones' immediate future founded, Nelson? How do you feel about it?
I mean, last year, why did they trade for Akers? It was, Madison and pretty much all those guys really weren't, relevant and they weren't doing well. Why did they trade for Akers this time? The assumption is that, Aaron Jones might not be completely healthy, or they're a little worried about it. Otherwise, I know Pelissero put out there that this is not a direct reflection on Aaron Jones's health, but I think we're left to wonder that's going to be my assumption, is that I think there is some concern with Jones moving forward. So I don't know.
With Mixon coming back last week and coming back with a vengeance, had a big game. There were some people, especially with Dare Ogunbowale's performance too. There were plenty of people ready to move on and cut Cam Akers this week in search of, Sean Tucker or somebody else off the waiver wire. Do they need to find a way to keep Akers on the roster now until we find out what's going on with Jones? Because if it's a backfield of Akers and Chandler, that's not really all that exciting. But when you consider the Vikings are 5-0 and that Sam Darnold has an offense rolling, maybe there's something here with Akers.
Well, I'm going to throw a little water on your fire with Akers, and that's that I haven't been impressed with Akers when he's had the opportunity so far. He hasn't looked all that good to me. So I'm going to say even if there's something going on with Jones and Akers is going to play, I'm only interested in Chandler at this point.
Yeah, I think the thing is if Aaron Jones plays this week, I'm willing to release Akers. I personally would still, if I can, keep him around just in case, because he is still the guy behind the guy. And if Aaron Jones, not that he would be put on IR, I don't think it's going to be anything like that, but I might have a spot start in it for Akers if Chandler were to go down in week 8 and they have nobody else, and if Jones is not healthy. Now, that's a lot of what if. Yes. That's why I say if I have the roster spot, I haven't been all that impressed either, but just for any teams of mine, Nelson, that are starved for running backs, that's still a guy I want to cling on to at least one more week just to see what happens there. And maybe it's nothing, and maybe it's a detriment to my team by putting Akers in too. That's the other thing to be concerned about as well. Let's Bill Hollywood, how's it going? We appreciate you hanging out with us tonight, Bill, as well as Michael Kinzel. We're going to get to your Sean Tucker question in a little bit, Michael. Let's move on and talk about last night's game. We kind of talked about the Breece Hall aspect a little bit. What about the flip side, Nelson? Ray Davis, 20 carries, 97 yards, 55 yards on 3 catches. This is one of those things where, you like to have this type of player on your roster if you have James Cook, or even if you don't. But now when Cook does come back, and if that's this week, great. But if not, has Ray Davis taken a chunk of James Cook's workload off of his hands now that we need to be concerned with for fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a concern because Cook's dealing with turf toe, and that's a tough injury for running backs. And I think it's going to be a couple of weeks here before. I mean, there's a chance he misses week 7, but if he does play, I think the Bills are going to be cautious and not give him the same type of workload. So, yeah, as a James Cook owner, I think you need to be prepared to see a dip in touches and production for the next couple of weeks.
And go ahead, keep going. I'm sorry.
No, it's just the nature of the beast with the NFL. When your guy gets injured, it sucks, but even when they come back, when it's like this type of injury, like a turf toe, it's not just like, okay, they're 0%, they're inactive, and now this week they're 100%, they're active and they're ready to go. Right. It's kind of like a ramp up process. So I think they're going to be cautious with them.
Knowing that he will not get his full complement of touches that he was getting before, does James Cook creep into the territory, Nelson, where you might have a lot of good running backs on your team where you might consider starting 2 or 3 other guys and benching James Cook?
I haven't gotten to that point just yet. But okay, so let's hypothetically speaking, let's say he's active week 7. Let's say he gets in some late practices this week and they say, he's good to go. I'm going to assume that it's going to be some type of committee. They're not going to just, go right back to his normal workload. So we have to talk kind of like a 1-for-1. What kind of running back options do we have when we're talking about sitting James Cook? I got to have, solid options here.
So let's do this. Let's say your other 3 running backs are Kyren Williams, J.K. Dobbins, and Chuba Hubbard. Would you play Cook ahead of any of those guys? And just real quick, just for the viewers understand, Kyren Williams at home against the Raiders, J.K. Dobbins at Arizona, and who was the other one I said? Chuba Hubbard at Washington. Yeah. James Cook at home against the Titans.
Yeah. I'm sitting James Cook.
Okay. So it is possible. What if Jordan Mason plays this week? If he's active, would you play Jordan Mason over James Cook?
I would play Mason.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of where we're at on that. Let's do Russell Wilson. I originally thought the headline of the day was going to be this Russell Wilson thing, and now it's trumped like 4 times over. Russell Wilson is apparently, according to Tom Pelissero, in line to make his next start against the Jets on Sunday Night Football and his debut start for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike Tomlin said that he is in consideration for the starting job, or Mike Tomlin just might be messing with us. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
It would probably be in his best interest, and Tomlin seems like the type of guy that would want to play this up until the very last second, where the Jets don't know if they're prepping for Fields or if they're prepping for Russell Wilson. But if Wilson is in line to start against the Jets, number one, what are we doing with him on the waiver wire? How much of a priority is he? And how does he change, the Pat Freiermuth and the George Pickens of the world if he's under center as opposed to Justin Fields, Nelson?
One, I want no part of Russell Wilson on the waiver wire, so I'm not going to be acquiring him this week. Fields, the thing is, his rushing ability is what makes him a target in fantasy. Otherwise, like this offense with Arthur Smith, it's boring. It's junk, So with Russell Wilson at quarterback, I just don't see it. I don't think they have enough weapons on that offense where, I would ever see myself starting Russell Wilson. So I think it's a bad decision for Pittsburgh if they're really considering it, or if they're trying to, play it up and trying to get, the team they're playing this week to have to, kind of game plan for Wilson and Fields, that kind of thing, a little gamesmanship,
right.
Maybe that has to do with it. I just can't imagine. Fields has actually been playing pretty well and they've got a winning record. So I don't see why they would go and make this change at this point.
If they do make the change, does it move the needle at all? One, good or bad for Pickens, for Freiermuth, for Najee Harris, for any of these pass catchers?
Wilson's probably, I don't know, man. I think Wilson's probably a little more accurate than Fields, but at the end of the day, it's the offensive coordinator is not getting the targets to Pickens. So I think unfortunately, like the why we're upset as a Pickens owner is the fact that it's the lack of targets. He's not like being treated as like a wide receiver one where you got to get him involved. They're content, running the ball, throwing to the open guy. Their defense, keeps them in the game. That's kind of what their MO is at this point. So I don't think, Wilson's going to move the needle for them for these pass catchers.
Yeah. And I tend to agree with you too. Like whatever I was doing before with Pickens and Freiermuth, benching or starting, I'm doing the same thing with Wilson.
Yeah.
Al Paul hanging out on the YouTube chat right now. Speaking of Steelers, Jaylen Warren is killing him right now. Warren finally gets back this past week and does a little bit, not much. Nelson, this was one of the guys that I grabbed in a ton of leagues as my number 4 running back, and sometimes my number 3 running back. And this is a guy that I was hoping that could be a flex guy. I thought he was more of a dynamic player than Najee Harris. Obviously, injuries have hurt him this season. What does the near future look like for Jaylen Warren in fantasy? Is he going to have this, kind of mid-season come on where he at least meets Najee Harris or competes with him for the most touches in the backfield, or are we looking at sort of like a continued lost season for Warren?
I think it was just a bad run out for Warren to this point. He got hurt. It's unfortunate. And I think right now Najee's going to get the lion's share of the touches. I agree with you. I think Warren is a much more dynamic player than Najee. But Najee's coming off a pretty big game, his best game of the season. So, and Warren, that was his first game back. He was basically, Tomlin, beginning of the week, basically said that like he was highly questionable or out, and then he came back. So I think again, it's going to be a ramp up process for Warren. But yeah, I could see later in the season, like he's a guy that I'm not going to go drop. Because I could see like later in the season, Najee's not getting it done. and, just kind of stuck in mud, and they need kind of like a little bit of a change, I could see where, they flip it and then Warren's getting the touches. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at with him. He's just a stash guy. You gotta hold him on your bench. You can't have too many high expectations for him, because what's going to happen is you're just going to be disappointed here for the next several weeks, and then you're going to want to cut him out of spite.
I think the other thing to keep in mind too is whether he has, I know Paul was telling us about the role that he has in Pittsburgh, and yeah, that's the role he has right now. But all it takes is one Harris injury, and that role increases quite a bit. And Warren becomes a guy that you want to start if Harris isn't active that week. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. I'm with you. I'm not cutting him. I'm stashing him and seeing what happens going forward. The Cardinals have activated wide receiver Zay Jones to their 53-man roster as of yesterday afternoon. Why do I bring this up? Well, he was reinstated from a 5-game suspension by the team last week, but he didn't play because of a hamstring injury against Green Bay. Now he's going to have a chance to play against the Chargers on Monday Night Football. And Marvin Harrison Jr. got concussed at Lambeau Field this past week. And if you are looking for somebody on your roster that you can keep on your roster in case Harrison can't clear concussion protocol and you want to take it all the way up to Monday, well, enter Zay Jones. That's an option for you. Yeah. My real question here, Nelson, because I don't think Harrison plays this week. It's just so rare for the turnaround to get these guys clear of all concussion protocol by then. Who do we start for Arizona? Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Zay Jones, all at wide receiver, all viable. Do you have a favorite among that trio?
Yeah, I think Wilson. I think he's probably available a little bit in some leagues.
Yep.
But the guy that's readily available is Dortch. That would be the guy that I would be targeting, that with the assumption that Harrison is going to miss the game. Zay Jones, I like the thought, but that's a little deep. That's one where I don't know if I'm ready to, if my team is in that much of shambles that I got to pick up Zay Jones and start him, this week. Whew. So I trust Dortch. I think he'll see some targets, and I think Wilson's probably the main wide receiver that benefits from it. I think McBride probably, sees even more usage.
You would not start any of those Cardinals receivers if Harrison is active, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Speaking of receivers that have not been active yet this season, Ricky Pearsall has now been designated for return off the non-football injury list. He fell victim to a gunshot at an attempted armed robbery, but he is now resuming football activities, and he has 21 days to be activated from the NFI list. The problem for him is Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel are still both on this team. Neither one of them was traded. And you have Juwan Jennings, who had that big 40-point outburst earlier, and he's been involved in the offense. And, oh, by the way, George Kittle's still there. From a redraft perspective, Nelson, non-dynasty, is Pearsall a guy that just belongs on waiver wires? I'm just not seeing a path to success here right now.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it, because at the end of the day, you got Ayuk and Deebo healthy, and right behind them is Jennings. So I just don't see where Pearsall fits in, other than, the occasional, handful of snaps once he's ready to go and mix them in. But I mean, he needs multiple things to happen in order for him to, sniff a lineup this year.
Dynasty, are you excited about him going forward, of what he can be for San Francisco? I don't know what you thought of him coming out of Florida either.
No, I'm not. I wasn't that excited.
Okay.
Older guy, I don't know. I just don't. I don't like those type of receiver profiles coming out of college, and I think that, unfortunately, I don't think he went to the right team. Especially, well, let me put it this way: he went to the right team if Brandon Ayuk got traded before the season started.
Right.
But with him signing his contract, I think he's on the wrong team.
Andrew Kramer reported today in Minnesota that TJ Hawkinson was practicing. The Vikings have already opened up his return window before they played the Jets in London in week 5, and week 7 could be a possible return. So we could see Hawkinson on the field this week. I did not draft Hockenson in a lot of spots, Nelson, because I thought the Vikings were not going to be very good this year. Definitely, I did not see this coming with Darnold in the offense. But I also didn't know when he'd be coming back. Now that he's coming back, to me, this is a different landscape for Hockenson than what I thought he was going to be walking into coming off the injury.
Mhm.
The Vikings are undefeated. The offense is humming. Darnold looks great. I would not say MVP candidate, but he's not far off with the season he's had. And again, small sample size.
Yeah.
But now that we know Hockenson is going to be returning sooner rather than later, I mean, he might have the looks of like a top 5 tight end the rest of the way.
Listen, I think Hockenson, I think it's a little easier for tight ends to come back from an ACL surgery type of injury compared to like wide receivers and running backs. They're bigger guys. They're making one cut and looking for the ball. So I would say that Hockenson probably has a good chance. I don't know about top 5. Well, man, tight end's been such a shit show.
That's what I'm saying.
Might be right. Top 5 might be just right on Hockenson. Yeah.
Why do you think that is this year that we've seen? Now, I know Kelsey's been coming on, but we kind of touched on Kincaid not just getting it done. Mark Andrews has obviously not been anywhere close to good for the duration of the season. Who am I forgetting here? Laporta catches the big 52-yard touchdown, but that's his only catch this last game. Kincaid, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the reason is. Like how did you handle tight ends in your drafts this year? I should ask you that first.
Yeah. So for me this year, I actually wanted one of the top tight ends. So the way I played it out was if I can get one of the top tight ends at a decent value, and it was dependent on who was on the board at the time when let's say like a Laporta, a McBride, Kincaid was available.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't in on Pitts this year. Pitts was a guy like he needed to fall dramatically in drafts, but those other guys, I was definitely interested. Once I pushed that back at tight end, Bowers was my target. And the funny thing is I tried to get Hockenson on as many teams as possible also, as long as, it was within reason where he went in drafts.
Right.
Because I looked at it as, okay, I punted tight end, and if I can just put it together with, paper mache, for the first few weeks, and then Hockenson comes back and he potentially could be a top 5 tight end. That was my thought process of how I was trying to play it out. So I would say I have a lot of these tight ends that we're talking about that have been struggling. McBride actually is coming around. So I want to say it was like the first week, 2 weeks where he was kind of slow out of the gates, but
yeah,
he seems to be fine. And then now with the Rice injury, I think Kelsey actually, ends up, with a pretty good run out where he's going to, see a lot of targets from Mahomes moving forward. But, in terms of like my ownership and how I, played out tight end, that's, I have a lot of these like, higher end guys at tight end.
It seems like every year, I'm like, and I don't play in the FFPC obviously, but like the non-tight end premium stuff I play in, I still like getting one of those elite tight ends, and it's been frustrating this year. But I think you're right. I think McBride's been doing fine. Kelsey, it should be in for another. I mean, that guy just gets 900,000 yards every single year, and I think it continues this year for sure. Dave Canales said today that the 21-day window for Jonathon Brooks to return from injured reserve will take place this week. Brooks is the Athletic had a report today that still week 9 is probably most likely for Brooks to come back. And honestly, if you're the Panthers, do you really want to rush this guy back in what looks like a lost season? Chuba Hubbard's been doing great. What happens when Brooks comes back to Hubbard? Is this like 50-50, 70-30, 60-40? Like, what do you think is going to happen? Because this could be these next 2 weeks could be the last great startable weeks for Hubbard this year if the Panthers decide to bring Brooks on and utilize him quite a bit.
So for me, I don't see how, Brooks just comes back from IR and he's a rookie, and I just don't see where he just all of a sudden takes over this backfield. Chuba's been really good to begin the year, so I don't think he's going away. So if anything, I think it's one of those things where Brooks mixes in with Chuba, not like Chuba takes a back seat.
And then at that point, Brooks isn't really that playable, and Hubbard is still startable, right? At least as a flex.
Yeah, I think what's going to end up happening is if Brooks is ready to go before the trade. When's the trade deadline? Like November 1st, something like that.
I'll look it up right now.
So I think if they bring Brooks back and he looks good in practice, I could see where like Miles Sanders gets traded, right? Mm-hmm. And Brooks kind of takes over Sanders' role and touches in the offense. Because again, like Chuba's done nothing to show or tell the coaches that Brooks needs to be starting over me.
Right.
So I know for fantasy, I know for dynasty, Brooks is, kind of like a big name. He was hyped up in drafts. I wasn't one of them. Like, he was going like 8th, 9th round in drafts. And I wasn't interested in him. I thought there was other, still at that point, I thought there was still some like startable running backs and some guys with potential that were going to start the year healthy. So, and, for me, I like fading guys coming off of, running back, wide receiver coming off of ACL surgery. I'm just not interested in them the first year back.
As producer Matt Deutsch points out, the NFL trade deadline this year also coincides with Election Day. 3 weeks from today, it is November 5th for the trade deadline. The last thing I want to bring up here in this segment, Puka Nacua is not practicing again this week, Nelson. Mm-hmm. He was expected to miss at least another month, according to the late September report from Jay Glazer. So maybe, again, right around Election Day, maybe that's when Nacua comes back. But Cooper Kupp may have maybe on the cusp of his return for Los Angeles. As we know, Kupp, you have to start him. He's a target monster. Is there any other receiver on the Rams with the potential return of Kupp that you'd still be looking at as a potential flex this week, Nelson? And the Rams, I'm looking it up right now to find out who they play. The Rams are against the Raiders at home at SoFi this week.
Yeah,
so
Jordan Whittington.
Whittington's the only guy for you?
Yeah, that's the only guy.
I think and he's not a desirable one, right? I mean, this is a guy like you would feel okay about, but not necessarily want to target and make sure you have him in your lineup.
Not with Kupp back. No.
Yeah. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break, catch your breath, wet the whistle. We'll have an FFPC waiver wire preview next. We're going to talk about some of the players. I know Michael Kenzel was asking about Sean Tucker. We'll get into Xavier Hutchinson, Bub Means, and Grant Calcaterra. God, who would have thought we'd be talking about these guys? But we are. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. He's Nelson Sousa from FTN Fantasy. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. We roll on next.
We're telling ourselves happy stories about players we want to pick, less happy stories about players we don't want to pick. And part of that is being ready to abandon our own carefully crafted narratives when it's time to abandon them, right? Like, bail, this was not working, So like we come in with super hard opinions and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't. The better fantasy players are the people who acknowledge quickly that, hey, this isn't working out. Doesn't mean you have to abandon a player, but it means you have to abandon the approach and maybe you have to go with a different player. I mean, if people were playing Stephon Diggs last year down the stretch, they were only playing him because his name is Stephon Diggs. You have to be ready to acknowledge, hey, this guy's not getting the job done. I did it. Bloom and I had a big discussion about this last December, and I'm saying you can't play him right now, right? And I know that's a hard decision to make because why? FOMO. We're going to miss out on that big game. The minute I sit this guy down, he's going to have the big game. Well, maybe. But also, while he is not having great games, there are other guys on your roster having great games. And I think that's to me, the hardest thing about fantasy is like, when do I divorce myself from my narrative? When do I tell when do I acknowledge my happy story is not coming true? I need to figure something else out. And the people who are good at that are the people who are good at fantasy football.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, rolls on here on a glorious Tuesday night, 3 weeks away from the NFL trade deadline. Still plenty of time to join the FFPC Weekly Challenge over at myffpc.com. Set your team however you want to do it, 10 players or 12 players if you want to play with kickers and defenses. Enter for as little as $35. Win as much as $2,500. Check that out, myffpc.com. No stacking, one player per team. Nelson and I will put together a lineup in this segment, actually, that you can feel free to use if you'd like to. Our producer, Matt Deutsch, has the QR code up on the screen. If you scan that, it will take you right to the website. You can enter and start building your team now. The thing I wanted to point out here from Tony, I think it's Tony Nelson, watching us on YouTube tonight. Nelson Sousa, by the way, from For The Numbers, FTN Fantasy, at the franchise_12 on the X. He says, is there an injury that you would immediately fade a player rest of the season? He mentioned, or Bill Hollywood mentioned turf toe. Tony Nelson also said hammies and high ankle sprains. Is there anything that you've seen in and let's focus on like running backs, receivers, tight ends. Is there anything that you've seen where a player is not out for the season? It's not like a torn ligament or anything, but you see it and you're like, okay, this is really bad news for this guy.
I mean, even hammies, I think if they get the right treatment and they rest, they get the proper rest and don't rush back, I think they can be fine. I think it's when you go and re-injure that same hamstring a second time, that's when it's time to fade. Because, you're probably not going to be 100% the rest of the year. High ankle sprains, again, you can miss 3 to 4 weeks with something like that. And I think with running backs, they can come back and be fine. I'd probably say that like calf injuries are kind of like a no-no for me. I think that's the one where, cause like I've had, calf injuries in the past, especially when I was younger and playing sports, and that is no fun. That's an injury where like it's calves are tricky. It takes a long time. I feel like it takes a long time to heal properly and really easy to re-injure. So that's probably the one. I think again, hammies, high ankles, I think if treated properly and you rest, you should be fine.
I think any soft tissue stuff, I wouldn't say I fade the rest of the season, but I'm always prepared for the longer end of the spectrum for a guy. But always expecting to miss 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, well, I expect that I'll be able to put him in my lineup again like week 7 or week 8 after that. And that's not a hard and fast rule. Yeah. That's just something I've conditioned myself to.
And there's different severities, right?
So, right, totally.
Yeah, and we don't know that. Like we don't play doctor,
Right. Well, some of us do, but some of us do on social media, and it's fine. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Let's.
Are you talking about the good ones or the bad ones?
I'm talking about everybody. Like,
okay. I didn't know if you wanted to get into something.
No, there's nothing I want to get into. Listen. I really don't want to offend anybody here. That's my end goal. But there is nothing like the doctor who is examining the scans and the imaging, the injury itself. That's who I am comfortable with. It's fine if you have a background and are good at it and want to do it on X and maybe you're very good at it, and that's fine. I tend to take, with all due respect, I tend to take those a little bit with a grain of salt on the internet. Yeah. That's my feeling. And that's just for me. There's other people that put a lot of stock into it, and that's fine too. Let's get into the waiver wire here before I get myself into trouble. Sean Tucker, let's talk about him. This guy came out, I don't want to say nowhere, because we knew that Rachaad White was doubtful. We knew that Bucky Irving probably wasn't touching the ball 30 or 35 times in this game. But this guy, mother of God, Nelson, did he come in like a bat out of hell?
Yeah.
Undrafted free agent last year, does it as a runner, does it as a receiver. What was it, like 180, 190 total yards, which was
2
crazy.
touchdowns, right?
What's it? Yeah, exactly. What's it going to take in the FFPC this week? How much do you need to bid, to ask Michael Kunzel's question? How much are you going to need to bid to win Sean Tucker this week?
Too much.
You're staying away.
Yeah, he's a trap.
Why is he a trap? This is interesting.
You're paying for last week's stats. You're looking at a box score, and you're saying that's what I want moving forward, and you got to take a step back and say, okay, I'm interested in Sean Tucker. He piques my interest. You got to ask yourself, okay, where's Rachaad White? He was missing last week,
right?
But is Rachaad White on IR? He's not on IR. No. Is White out for the year? He's not out for the year. So what ends up happening when White comes back? Okay. So you got to ask your question. You got to ask that first. With Bucky's there. Bucky's looked good. Okay. We now know that Bucky with a White injury is not this incredible superstar that's, going to win us fantasy leagues. And maybe he still could in a timeshare, but the point is he's not going to have, a bell cow type of role. This particular game was way more high scoring than anyone would have predicted, including Vegas.
Right. Totally.
So logically, I'm going to say, okay, Sean Tucker is not going to do that every single week. So when I factor in those things and I ask myself those questions, okay, what is Sean Tucker going to go for? I'm going to tell you that I think the public, not what I'm going to bid, but I think the public is going to bid in upwards of 300 plus for Sean Tucker. I think that's your starting point with Tucker. So my question is, what do you do with Sean Tucker once you get him for $300, let's say? And then let's say Rachaad White is back next week. So that's my question.
Yeah.
What do you do? You got an expensive toy on your bench.
Right. You don't want to be paying even triple digits for the guy behind the guy behind the guy, right? Like, because now you need all this stuff to happen. I think that's interesting. So now what happens? What if we know this? What if we get reports saying that Rachaad White is looking doubtful for week 7? So you might be able to get one more week out of Sean Tucker. Is he still not worth it because of the presence of Bucky Irving?
So all I hear, Rachaad White questionable for week 7. All I hear is the price on Sean Tucker getting more expensive.
Okay.
So listen, I think Tucker did very well. I think Tucker is a talented running back. By no means do I think he's like a plotter and has zero talent. That's not what I'm saying here. All I'm saying is that I'm a little more pessimistic than probably what most people are going to be on Wednesday night. I think he's just a guy that is going to go for huge money, and it's just going to be empty dollars. I think you're going to put him in your lineup next week, and you're going to expect that same type of turnout, and it's not going to happen. What happens when he goes, 10 rushes for 46 yards, no touchdowns?
Yeah.
Then what? So listen, that's just my opinion. This is not me trying, smoke and mirrors, trying to get Sean Tucker cheaper. I'm not going to be in on Sean Tucker. I have a ton of teams, right? FFPC. I got a ton of teams. You guys can look it up. I'm not going to have any $200 or $300 bids with Tucker.
So the other thing I'm thinking here is let's do Patrick Taylor here, because this might be a short conversation. It seems like Mason is probably on the healthier side of questionable right now than the doubtful side. So maybe it's nothing if Mason is coming back. Patrick Taylor was getting worked in on Thursday night against the Seahawks. 5 carries, 16 yards. He also caught a pass for 12 yards. Now, Isaac Guerrero was not targeted in that game. He did have 99 yards, but one of those was a 76-yard carry. So again, you take that away. I know I'm picking at nits here, and I probably shouldn't be picking and choosing, but if you do take away that run, 9 carries for 23 yards. Not exactly the most efficient guy in the world, nor was Taylor. Is Taylor a guy that you want to keep around? Because we do know that McCaffrey is not playing this week. We don't know about Mason, and Taylor's going to be a lot cheaper than Sean Tucker.
Yeah, so Taylor for a few bucks, I'll have him in bid groups, and that's just in case, Mason, they decide to hold him out, and then it gives me kind of something to think about because they were using him a little bit in the passing game, but I will say I've watched him in Green Bay, and I wasn't particularly fond of him, so I don't think he's anything special. Garendo, on the other hand, I think Garendo is he's explosive, and he's the guy that intrigues me the most in this backfield. But Taylor's the one that's 0% owned, so he's the one that's available and that you can go target. But for a couple of bucks, sure, it doesn't hurt you. You can go dump him the following week.
The other running back I wanted to bring up here, as far as the waiver wire goes here with the FFPC, Dearness Johnson, again, not a guy who's going to be going super expensive. And, it seems like Travis Etienne will not play in week 7, which means it'd be Bigsby and Johnson. Pretty good matchup here against the Patriots for Dearness Johnson this week. What are we spending on him? I shouldn't say what are we spending on him, Nelson. What do you think he's going to go for in the FFPC? Because he's available in a lot of leagues.
I'm probably going to say that, he's more, it's a clearer picture with him because I think ETN is a lot more questionable than Mason is at this point.
Yep.
I think ETN probably misses the game. So if you're desperate and you need plug in a running back, I think Dearness Johnson, could be that guy. I think people are probably going to be somewhere in the $10 to $50 range, probably for Dearness.
Yeah, wait, how much did you say?
$10 to $50.
10 to 50. Okay, yeah, okay, yeah, that would make sense. Okay. So with Dearness Johnson, I'm with you on this. I like him better than Taylor. I think you've talked me down. I was going to bid some pretty serious money on Tucker. I think I'm going to stay away from that now after thinking about it with you. So thank you for that, Nelson. I owe you one. Dearness Johnson, I do like better than Taylor here for sure. What about, I want to ask just a starter sit here. Jojo on Twitch right now. Which do you like better for a start this week at flex? Tank Bigsby or George Pickens? Pickens, who gets the Jets on Sunday Night Football. God, think of the storylines there. Pickens, who's going against the Jets, or Tank Bigsby this week, who's going to be going up against the Patriots?
Yeah, Bigsby, hands down.
No question. Okay.
Yep.
Moving on to wide receivers here. Let's talk Gabe Davis. 2 touchdowns from Trevor Lawrence in London against the Bears, but they were both at the end when the game was kind of decided. New England Patriots in week 7, is there anything here, or should we be focusing our energies on Kirk, Engram, and Brian Thomas as the proper Jaguars to start in week 7?
I think we've seen this movie before from Gabe Davis.
Yes.
He's got those big spike weeks in him, and then he goes right back to a 0. And I think with this offense, I think it was a little quirky because I think, Brian Thomas, was struggling a little bit. I think there was a little more attention on Thomas, and Davis, benefited from some garbage time. But I mean, look at Evan Ingram, first game back, huge usage. You got Christian Kirk there. Thomas, I think, is the real deal. He's legit. So, that's probably another guy that, people might look at the box score and fire up, Gabe Davis for some money. And again, that's probably a guy that, you should just avoid.
Yeah, I'm fine with that too. I'm not really focusing on him whatsoever. Noah Brown, I think we should talk about here because he had the most targets of any Commanders receiver against the Ravens this past Sunday. He did catch 4 balls, 58 yards. McLaurin was the guy who got in the end zone both times. Ertz had more receiving yards than him. But this was his best game of the season. Your thoughts on maybe not starting Noah Brown this week, Nelson, but picking him up and stashing him just to see what happens?
I've always been a fan of Noah Brown. He's had good games with the Cowboys. He had some big games with the Texans last year. So like he's kind of put it already on tape that he's capable of that. And I think Washington, outside of Terry McLaurin, there's a void there for like a consistent number 2 receiver. So I could see where like he kind of develops and he's an okay guy like that you can get. It will get you through your bye weeks and maybe if your lineup's a little banged up.
The thing with Brown is I like what you're saying, and I happen to agree with most of it. The part that always sticks with me is I'm never good enough to have that extra spot on my roster, especially when the bye weeks and injuries hit. Like I need all 20 spots. And that's the part where it's like, can I afford to keep Brown around just to see what happens? Maybe I can on some teams. On other teams, I think that he'd be the guy that I'd end up releasing for, whatever running back I was going to pick up that week or, a bye week defense or something. I don't know. Let's focus on the Texans here. We know that Nico Collins is on IR for at least another 3 weeks, which means it's the Diggs and Dell show. However, Xavier Hutchinson was kind of an interesting guy last week, especially on Sunday morning waivers for a lot of people. Now, he got 2 targets in that game against New England, did not catch either one of them. And at the same time, Schultz, Dell, and Diggs combined to get 24 out of CJ Stroud's 31 passing attempts this past week. Is Hutchinson still a guy that we can move forward and look at picking up until Collins is back? Or are we really grasping at straws if we ever decide to pick this guy up and play him, even, especially with Mixon healthy now? I mean, there's just so many good weapons on that team.
I mean, he was a pickup last week once Nico went on IR. I have a few Hutchinson teams. It's probably a little premature, but I'm going to drop him for the flavor of the week this week. The Texans offense, they're going to force feed Diggs, Dell, and Mixon. You got to remember Mixon came back and they're going to run the ball with Mixon. He's going to get, check downs out of the backfield. So I just don't see where, Hutchinson, I don't think there's room there for him at this point.
There is room in New Orleans for Bob Means because Chris Olave did not practice today, or yesterday, I should say. I don't know if he practiced today. Rashid Shaheed, I don't think practiced today either with his injury that he suffered in the fourth quarter against the Buccaneers on Sunday. And if we look at that game, again, it was kind of a weird one. So I'm always careful taking away stats in this. But Bob Means tied for the team league in targets with 8. 5 catches, 45 yards. He got in the end zone. I think the other thing that's important to bring up is Spencer Rattler was the starting quarterback. We know Spencer Rattler is going to be the starting quarterback this coming week too. And we do know that he has been throwing to Bob Means on the scout team in practices, right? So they have this relationship already. It is Thursday night football. Patrick Surtain is not expected to play. How much would you spend on Bob Means knowing that he could be the number 1 receiver for the Saints on Thursday night football?
See, he's intriguing because you're talking about New Orleans being down. Olave, he's not going to clear concussion protocol in time. And then there's a report that Shaheed is banged up and that his knee might not be okay. So you're talking about a guy, never mind just a spot start, which, could mean, at least a half 6 to 10 targets on Thursday. He's a guy that I would probably feel pretty comfortable putting in my lineup with Olave and Shaheed out of the lineup. But moving forward, if Shaheed's gonna miss any type of serious time, maybe Means becomes something because he's got that rapport with Rattler.
Is it going to take triple digits to get him in the FFPC waiver wire tomorrow?
No. I think we're still short of triple digits on him.
Okay. So the better part of $100, you should feel pretty good about getting Bob Means on your roster. And then you can make your decision on Thursday night too. Grant Calcaterra is a guy I want to bring up right now from the Eagles. Now, in this game against Cleveland, Dallas Goedert left with a hamstring injury, which is usually not good for the following week. This was a guy that we loved in draft circles, and then he ended up getting retiring for concussions. He came back, and if you want to pick him up this week, he's probably not going to cost a lot. And, oh, by the way, Cole Kmet and Jake Ferguson are both on bye. So Grant Calcaterra, 4 catches, 67 yards. That's with Dallas Goedert playing part of the game. What happens if Calcaterra is the starting tight end this week for Philadelphia? What do you do in a tight end premium league if you need Calcaterra?
He's a guy that's going to interest me, this week. He looks like a big wide receiver playing tight end. So I think he's a little bit of a mismatch problem for defenses. You got, Brown and Davante back. Goddard's probably going to miss some time with the hammy. So he's a guy that makes sense to me that you'd be targeting.
And Hurts already went to him. I mean, we've seen it. So this isn't even a speculative thing. Like, we've seen it on the field, and maybe he gets it done going forward. Now, another guy that you could pick up if you are hurting at tight end this week in the FFPC, and I should have checked ownership on Jatavian Sanders. I don't think he's owned in a lot of spots, so I'll bring him up. Career high in both targets and catches against Atlanta this past week. And they get the Commanders this week. Do the the Panthers play the Commanders? So Jatavian Sanders, 5 for 49 on 7 targets. You could do a lot worse than Jatavian Sanders as your starting tight end. Again, if you're missing Kmet or Ferguson, or maybe this is a guy that can turn it on and have a nice second half to the year here, Nelson.
Yeah, he's a young guy, athletic. It's a real rebuilding team. He's intriguing because what if Deontay Johnson's gone and they trade him away? You and they want to develop the young receivers, and then they got this young tight end. So he's another intriguing guy that, again, I'm not going to get super excited about, but he's a guy that probably should be on rosters at this point.
And he won't cost. I mean, who do you think costs more this week, Calcaterra or Sanders?
Calcaterra.
Calcaterra will. Okay. Yeah. And these guys, they still should be buys under $100, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We're giving you the bargain basements here on the.
I mean, Calcaterra, shit. I could see Calcaterra maybe go. He's going to push 100 in FFPC. He's going to push. Sanders, no. He's going to be the cheaper guy.
Which is weird because Sanders was he the number 2 tight end drafted this year in the NFL draft behind Bowers? I want to no. There's somebody who went before him. Commanders guy, Sitton. Went ahead of him. But Sanders was a guy that was touted as maybe the second best tight end in the draft too. So he's another interesting guy going forward. Let's talk about the quarterbacks here before we put together this weekly challenge. Tua Tagovailoa, I looked. He's available in about a third of FFPC main event Fantasy Pros Championship leagues. If he is available in your league, is this a guy that we should get in business with as part of maybe a resurgence for the second half of the season for the Miami Dolphins, with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle being the beneficiaries of a Tua Tagovailoa return? Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to give away the next guy, but I've got the next guy ahead of Tua. I think he offers more upside, but Tua is a guy that is definitely worth for a couple of bucks, speculating on, because they're saying he is going to be back this year, and Miami's still going to try to win. So that's why they're going to welcome him back, and he's got Tyreek and Waddle in that offense. He's got Achane. So yeah, I mean, Tua's that if you're hurting at quarterback,
right?
Yeah.
I would not add him if I already have 2 quarterbacks, and I'm comfortable with them. I'm not adding Tua Tagovailoa at that point. But if I do need somebody, then yeah, for sure. Michael Kenzel posts on the YouTube chat, with Kincaid at tight end and Puka Nacua on IR and Rashid Shaheed injured, would you consider Pat Freiermuth at flex in the FFPC? Yeah, tight end premium format, Nelson. Pat Freiermuth at flex is totally A-okay.
Should already be a consideration.
Right. Exactly. I guess maybe the question is, because it should be a low scoring game, you would think, with the Jets and the Steelers on Sunday night, how much action is he going to get? But I mean, regardless of if it's Wilson or Fields, I'm still pretty comfy with Freiermuth in at flex.
Yeah.
The next guy on the list that you had teased is Drake Maye, a guy who made his debut this past week's NFL debut against the Houston Texans. You like Drake Maye better than Tua Tagovailoa going forward. Why is that?
Well, one, I had zero expectations for Drake Maye. First game in the NFL starting against Houston Texans, which is a tough defense.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like, he passed the eye test. Like, he made some nice throws that, like, not the average NFL quarterback makes. So, like, you can see the talent is there. And then he's got rushing upside. So that's the other thing, like, kind of like, with Jaden Daniels, and then Caleb, runs a little bit, but I actually think Maye is going to run more than Caleb.
I agree.
In their career. So when you've got that rushing upside, I think Maye's got kind of like a safe floor. The team's not very good. The defense is not very good. They're going to be playing behind. Like, the game script makes sense to me to why, like, I would be interested in Drake Maye.
38 rushing yards this past week in his debut. Also threw for 243. Granted, it was a game that after halftime he really had to throw to keep up in. But I thought for a season debut, to your point, eye test A+ for Drake Maye going forward. Spencer Rattler, I'm going to add on here just because he, to me, did better than I expected this past week. But if you don't want any part of Russell Wilson, I can't believe that you're too excited about adding Spencer Rattler on for the next 2 or 3 weeks, at least until Derek Carr gets back.
I mean, if I've got issues at quarterback, or I'm just trying to fill in, for a bye week or whatever, Rattler again offers rushing upside, and he's a gunslinger. But the issue is this week, I'm not thrilled with him. If he's missing Olave and Shaheed, like, his upside is very low. He needs those guys in the lineup for me to be interested in him.
The total on that game is 37 against the Broncos in the Big Easy on Thursday night. He's not a player that, I mean, obviously Superflex is a different conversation, but for single quarterback leagues, I think we can do a lot better than Spencer Rattler. Let's talk about the FFPC Weekly Challenge, Nelson, as you and I are about to build a lineup in this. And for anybody watching, play the FFPC Weekly Challenge now at myffpc.com. Scan the QR code on your screen that Matt has put up there. No draft, no salary cap. You are building a team any which way you'd like. You just can't have 2 players from the same team on your team. Enter for as little as $35, win up to $2,500. You can play in 10, 30, or 100-team contests. myffpc.com, myffpc.com is where to go for this. Nelson, you're familiar with this format. We just got to pick one player, or we can only pick one player per NFL team. We're obviously not going to use all the teams this week with, I believe, only 2 teams on a bye. Where would you like to start? I assume we're going to do a 10-team lineup, no kickers, no defenses, a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, and 4 flexes. We can go a lot of different directions here, my friend.
Okay. Let's start with our quarterback.
Okay, that works for me. I don't know how you like to do it. I usually like to look at the totals that Vegas is projecting and then see who I can target there. Do you have a specific quarterback in mind?
No, I don't. I'm open to, us talking about it.
Okay.
But what's nice is, here's the thing. So there's no salary cap, right? There's, to me, it's wide open. You're just picking the guy that you think is going to score the most points, at this point. So I'm going to say that I want a guy, usually with my quarterback. Yes, I look at the Vegas total to answer your question. But the other factor too, for me, is on the other side of the ball, is he going to have to stay with his foot on the gas and be aggressive? So, meaning, is the other offense going to score points? Because you don't want it to be one of those things where, they're facing, banged up team, it's going to be lopsided. Yeah, he might get it done in the first half, and it's like, it makes sense. The matchup makes sense. But then he takes his foot off the gas. Let's say a couple of those touchdowns end up being like rushing touchdowns to the running back, and you just don't quite get the ceiling from that quarterback.
Perfect example to your point. Normally I'd say, hey, let's fire up Jaden Daniels. Well, the total is 51.5 in that game, but the Commanders are 7.5 point favorites. I do believe there might be some foot off the gas for Jaden Daniels in the second half in that game.
Yeah.
For quarterback, I think what game is intriguing to me is that Lions-Vikings game in Minnesota. And we'll have a couple to pick from here. These are not necessarily high-end options here, but we could go with Goff. We could go with Darnold. It would prevent us from having a guy like Justin Jefferson or Amon-Ra St. Brown, Laporta, Montgomery, Gibbs. But that's a game we could look to. And there's one other game in the 50s this week that I saw besides those two. It was
what's Baltimore, Tampa Bay?
Baltimore, Tampa Bay. Why is it not on my sheet here? Oh, here it is right here. 48.5 in that game.
That would be that's a game that intrigues me because I think Tampa Bay can score. So going with like Lamar as your quarterback, he's got high upside.
He is a road favorite in this game, but I'm fine with I don't know like who else. The only other player I'd look at in that game would be Derrick Henry, but I'm fine with going with Lamar Jackson as our quarterback here against Tampa because that could obviously turn into a shootout.
Okay.
So let's put in Lamar Jackson as our quarterback on this team. Now, do you want to stick with running back and see where it takes us?
I'm good with whichever way you want to build.
Okay, let's take a look at running back here. I think the Buccaneers situation is a little bit too nebulous. We could look at Kareem Hunt or Jordan Mason in that Chiefs-Niners game. I don't know what's going on with Brian Robinson, especially formulating a lineup this early. So that kind of takes the Commanders out of the equation. Chuba Hubbard, I mean, maybe that game we could look at him there. And then obviously Gibbs and Montgomery in Detroit. Stay away from Aaron Jones.
Let's go with the exciting guy.
Okay, who's the exciting guy?
We got to go with it's like a movie, right?
Okay.
Who do the Eagles play?
The Eagles this week play the...
I know the answer, but go ahead. I'm
trying to. Why can I not find it? Oh, okay. So you want to go Tyrone Tracy here?
No.
Barkley,
revenge game.
Giants?
Come on.
It is a revenge game. God, where's my head at?
Come on, Eric.
Good Lord, this is bad.
Get with the program here.
All right, so
we're trying to build a winning lineup here.
Right, I know, and I'm totally out of it. So you're right. That is a must play. We have to play Barkley this week. That is a positive game script for him.
You know that coaching staff is going to feed him.
Yeah. Yes, they 100% will.
At New York Giants.
It is in New York too. Okay, so we got Barkley there. Let's see, what else could we go with here for a second running back? Kyron Williams against the Raiders. How do you feel about that?
No brainer.
Okay, we'll put him in. Kyron Williams.
Great matchup.
Okay. And then let's move on to tight end. I'm gonna do tight end. Yeah, I'm gonna do tight end right now. So we have Kelsey against Kelsey and Kittle in the same game, obviously. Is Brock Bowers too chalky at the Rams just because of all the targets he's gonna get?
I'm okay eating the chalk with. I mean, there's some good tight ends here, no doubt about it. But I mean, I'm okay with Bowers. But if you feel like, if he doesn't hit, and he's going to be the popular play, then, we could look at a Kelsey, Kittle, McBride.
What about Engram against the Patriots?
He might be chalky.
Okay. I just hate to use Kittle on these. He's so hit or miss. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He could get 2 for 30 or he could get 8 for 140 and 2 touchdowns. I would prefer Kelsey if it comes down to it. I would even say Kelsey over McBride.
I feel like the 49ers aren't they pretty decent against the tight end?
They're okay. I don't think yeah, I mean they're decent. I don't think they're above it.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, Kittle would be the type of guy that if we put him on this team, all of a sudden we're looking really good if he hits. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I look at it like this. The guy that Bowers, to me, he's going to get targets. He's good, right?
Yeah.
But if we want to fade the chalk, I think the guy that is going to be, less owned than Bowers is McBride with no Harrison.
Oh yeah, no Harrison. Yeah, no Trey McBride. That's who it should be, because it's such an unknown with all those receivers. The one thing we do know is it's going to be McBride. I like McBride here. That you bring that up. Let's stick. Well, we can always flex out one of these tight ends too.
For sure. You want to go take our 2 wide receivers?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so out of the running right now, Flowers, Brown, Devonta Smith, Cooper Kupp. We can't pick any of those, but anything else is fair game. Okay. Jefferson would be a possibility here against the Lions.
You like that game?
Yep,
we could go with both those guys.
Oh, that's not a bad idea. I could be down with that, and we could still flex out.
I want to say even last year, at the end of last year, I think when Minnesota went up against Detroit, I think both those guys went off.
That could be right, and I'm just trying to think of the injury situation in the secondary right now. I don't think there's anything glaring there. Let me look that up right now, because Jefferson and St. Brown, if I can find it here. Maybe I can't. Jefferson and St. Brown would make a lot of sense here as our top 2 receivers. Okay, you're talking about the Christmas Eve game last year, right?
Yeah.
That was St. Brown 12 for 106 and a touchdown. Justin Jefferson 6 for 141 and a touchdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with that. You want to do that, Jefferson and McBride and St. Brown?
That's what we need. We need the same type of game.
Right. And it might happen too. Okay, so we got Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and we have Justin Jefferson as our tight end or as our receivers. So now we do have four clean flexes. We can go anywhere we want on this.
Okay.
Let's see. What other game did I like here that we haven't? Shoot. I had it up a second ago. There's a third game that we haven't targeted yet that I really liked.
Okay.
What about Deontay Johnson against Washington as a flex? Who, I mean, that again, Panthers are 7.5-point dogs on the road, 51.5. Johnson had a really good game last week. Nobody else. I mean, or we could go Hubbard, but that's a negative game script for him there.
No, I like that. We can
Deontay
go
Johnson.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the other game I was looking at. I just don't know who to trust from the Commanders in that game, which kind of stinks because they could put up 30 points. But just not knowing what's going on with Robinson. Eckler kind of underwhelmed. I mean, Hurts, I guess, but
I mean, McLaren, but I mean, if
they're running in the second half,
and
they're bleeding clock, then I don't want McLaurin on my team,
Yeah. Maybe we leave Washington alone.
I think so. What about this is the other one that I was going to mention. Seattle and Atlanta. That game is in Atlanta, total of 51. Atlanta, a 3-point favorite. We have no Seahawks or Falcons on our team. We obviously can't take Geno Smith or Kirk Cousins, but anyone else is fair game.
Let's see.
This might come down to a London versus Bijan Robinson conversation, or Metcalf versus Kenneth Walker. Atlanta's a 3-point favorite. I don't know if I said that.
Yeah. Yep.
But that might be, as I look at it right now, I think that is the second highest total of the week of any game behind Carolina and Washington.
How do you see that game playing out?
I wouldn't be surprised to see. I mean, Seattle's been scuffling. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them get back on the winning track here, and pull the upset. In which case, I think Walker might be the better play. I don't know. Atlanta's secondary is so good, so I don't know if I want to put Metcalf out there, because even if they take Metcalf away, they still have competent. Like Lockett had a good game last week. You know, who knew it was going to be Lockett on Thursday Night Football, which gives me a little bit of pause to use any of the receivers there. But Walker's interesting. Bijan Robinson, Drake London. I think Seattle wins that. I don't know, something like 29-26, something like that.
Okay. So maybe Walker coming off a monster game last week, right?
What did he have a monster game last week? Maybe he did. Why can I not remember it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I had him in
No, last okay. So okay, he only had 32 rushing yards, but he did get a touchdown, but he had 8 catches for 37 yards.
Yeah,
So that was
not a monster, but yeah.
I mean, that's what is that? 6 point. That's 21 points. So yeah.
And the week prior he
went off. He went off the week prior. Yeah, maybe Kenneth Walker here.
Yeah, I think he's trending in the right direction.
Okay.
And then we got to decide between Bijan and London.
Bijan
got back on track last week. London looks really good. The only thing is, I think Seattle's banged up defensively. They still have what's his name? Is it Weatherspoon? But Tariq Woolen, I think, is out.
He did not play last week. Yeah. So then maybe, and he'd be the guy that they probably put on London. Maybe it's probably Drake London then. Especially if I'm forecasting a Seattle win, which is why we take Walker. Then maybe Drake London's the complimentary play there.
Okay.
All right. So we got one spot left on our squad.
One spot.
We have what do we have? We have 4 receivers, 3 running backs, a tight end, and a quarterback. And now it's just up to, I mean, we could go any which way we want. Is there another, do we want to come back to the tight end position? Is there anybody that we want to look at there? Yeah.
So if we think that at San Fran, if they can somehow, that's the only thing is that game, what's the total in that game? It's probably high 40s, right?
Yeah. It is 47. Niners are a 1-point favorite.
It's so tough because like those two teams, I could see like where that game underwhelms, where like both defenses play well and it's a struggle, or you could see like fireworks where they just go back and forth. And if they do that, then I think like Kelsey is interesting.
I'd be fine with Travis Kelce if we did that. Just real quick, I'll bring what up Michael Quinzel put in the YouTube chat. What about Chris Godwin at home against the Ravens this week? They are a 3.5-point dog, home dog. What about Godwin? 48.5 in the total in that game.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that.
We have Jackson. Yeah, we have Jackson.
Yeah, so Godwin's been so good.
Well, who do you like better, Godwin or Kelsey? Because those are the two guys we keep coming back to, or that we were coming back to Kelsey, but then Godwin I brought up.
Is there a running back that's just like in a great spot that we should be considering?
Well, I mean, Dobbins at Arizona. I don't know if I want. I think that's going a little bit too deep for this format.
I mean, for a weekly chat. So here's the thing: with no salary cap, I mean, I want to take studs. Like I don't want to get too cute, with taking like a guy like Dobbins when I've got Kelsey, Godwin, and guys like that have been like so good.
Right.
That's the thing. They have like a solid floor and they have upside.
Right. That's what you need. I mean, what about Mixon at Green Bay? And I don't even know what the spread. I think Green Bay's favorite. I would assume Green Bay.
That's a high scoring game too.
Yeah. That is I because he's obviously coming off a big, 47.5. Texans are 3-point dogs in that game. So, I mean, but as far as running backs go, I mean, after that, it gets dicey. I mean, I don't really want to play. I mean, as good as he was last night, I don't really want to play Breece Hall at the Steelers. Josh, I like Mixon better than Josh Jacobs in that game.
I think it's a wide receiver or tight end.
Okay. Well, then it comes back down. Well, okay, hold on. What about Jamar Chase at Cleveland? Because we don't have any Bengals. Or do you think Neighbors plays this week?
If Neighbors is cleared and we're projecting,
he's got Philly, and we have Barkley in that game, so that would be complementary pieces.
Yeah, I kind of like that.
Neighbors.
Yeah.
Okay, let's add him in, and then obviously, if we were playing this out, we can easily substitute in somebody else if we know he's not going, and the possibilities are endless. Chase, Godwin, and Kelsey. We all talked about the better boss. Our producer Matt Deutsch suggested Amari Cooper. What do you think Cooper does his first week as a Bill?
Oh,
because I don't know. I mean, like, listen, I know that he's going to be out there, but is he going to be out there for a full complementary of snaps, just not knowing the playbook for more than a few days?
Yeah, I think it's gonna take a little time. I don't think I'd be rushing it, at least in this format. I'd be rushing to put him in a lineup.
Right,
I think there's other receivers in better spots.
So the lineup that Nelson and I have put together for week 7 here is as follows. The quarterback is Lamar Jackson. The running backs are Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, and Kenneth Walker. The receivers are Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Deontay Johnson, and Drake London, as well as Malik Neighbors. And then tight end is Trey McBride this week. You can enter that yourself if you want to play it over at myffpc.com and enter the weekly challenge for as little as $35, as much as win as much as $2,500. Play with kickers and defenses or without. Scan the QR code, and that'll take you right to the page. Thank you, Matt, for throwing that up on the screen. And you'll add some weekly action to your FFPC fun. We are going to add some starter sit conversation to this show tonight before we bid you adieu and let you go. I have some questions for Nelson regarding guys like Tyler Algier, Xavier Legette. We haven't talked about Mike Gesicki. What the hell happened to him last week? Maybe he got hurt. I don't know. Baker Mayfield and much more. He's Nelson Sousa from FTN. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. Something called perpetual reloading to ensure something called a permanent championship window with FFPC Dynasty Leagues. How do we make sure that perpetual reloading is what we're doing in our rookie drafts every year to make sure that we're always competing for titles year in and year out?
Yeah, so we always have this tension between playing a little bit for the future and playing for the present. You'll have drafters jump into the startup. They'll draft the veterans. They're trying to win in that first year. Sometimes they do. I don't want to in any way, shape, or form suggest that doesn't work, because you see some of those teams compete and win titles. And yet, when we're thinking about the best way to control your chances to win, you want to be in the playoffs year after year. You want your championship window to always be open. You don't want to get to a point where you build, and then have a couple of years where you're going for it and then you're rebuilding again. You want to be in it every year. You want to get as many buys as possible so you don't have to compete in that quarterfinal round. You build a more powerful team. You can't control the injury that you have to the key player that cost you a title, or the 50-point game that a non-elite player like Amari Cooper scores and knocks you out. You can control having one of the best teams every single season. The way that you do that is you build depth in your player talent across all those positions. You build depth in your picks. In order to execute some of those types of things, you trade down, you trade peak players, you trade young players. You've got to trade things that people want. A lot of times I think when people are trying to reload or rebuild, they're trying to trade distressed assets at a level that the rest of the group isn't interested in, and then you feel like you can't move. If you're going to make trades, you got to trade things that people want. You can also trade 2 for 1.
High Stakes Fantasy Football Show coming into our final segment here on Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. So glad you're joining us. Chat rooms have been awesome tonight. Thanks, guys. Normally we're not live on Tuesday, but because there is no HSFF show next week, we are doing 2 of them this week, and we are in for a treat tonight. We have been all night. Nelson Sousa from For The Numbers Fantasy at FTN Fantasy on the X, at the franchise _12 on the X as well. That's where you can connect with Nelson there. We just put together an FFPC Weekly Challenge lineup. Let's get into some start or sit questions here that may be facing a lot of FFPC players this week. And I think we'll start in the AFC North with Chase Brown and Najee Harris. We talked about Harris going up against the Jets on Sunday Night Football. You have Chase Brown, who's been really coming on lately. Chase Brown, the second-year player out of Illinois, goes to Cleveland this week, a positive game script. If you can only play one of these guys, who is it, Nelson?
I'm going to play Chase Brown.
Over Harris.
I'm going to play him over Harris, yeah.
Now, I think most people who had drafted both these players obviously drafted Harris before Brown. Harris is active, but is it just the matchup that trumps it here for you, that Brown is the better play?
No, I just think Brown is the better player. I think he's just looked better all season long. Najee's coming off the big game, but other than that, like, he's been pretty underwhelming. And now it's going to be the second game back for Warren. I expect him to see a few more touches. And like, Brown's been good. Like, here's the thing. Najee's coming off the good game, so nothing wrong with him, but the upward trajectory for Chase Brown has been going on now for a few weeks now. And I think you saw it last week where you had Zach Moss fumble, and I want to say it was like in the third quarter maybe, and it was basically like Chase Brown show from there on out. So that could be something where the coaches finally are like, they're waking up to the fact that, hey, Chase Brown's pretty explosive. He's been doing well, and we gotta play him more, because I think he's explosive enough that he doesn't need too many touches, but obviously he needs a little more usage, and I think he could be like a fantasy monster. Whereas Najee, like, I don't know, like, he to me, like, he's boring. Like, he's gonna be solid for you, but like against the New York Jets, I'm not interested.
Can you see a scenario this season where Chase Brown makes Zach Moss irrelevant for starting for fantasy?
Yeah. I mean, I'm biased, Eric. So like, I have a lot of Chase Brown.
Okay.
I was a big believer in him. So I'm just going to say that, yeah, that it's all Chase Brown. And here's the other thing too. Like, part of the reason why I was all in on Chase Brown is that I'm not a big fan of Zach Moss. I don't think he's very good. And I think he had a little bit of a run last year when Taylor went out. And I think that was kind of like an optical illusion. And I think just things ran out well for him, but I don't think like he's that guy that you saw last year.
And he may not be. Like, I have Brown in a few spots in redraft. I have him a bunch in Dynasty. So I've been enjoying this little mini breakup that he's been having. I'm hoping for bigger things, even already this season, like you are too. So I would, you know what? I was going to say Najee Harris. I think you've convinced me. I think Chase Brown is the play over Harris this week. This might be an easier one. Tank Bigsby at home against the Patriots, or Javonte Williams, who is going to be in New Orleans on Thursday Night Football. We're assuming ETN probably misses this game, Nelson. Does that just make it seem like, okay, Bigsby's the guy here, regardless of how terrible the Jaguars are?
Yeah, we're going Bigsby.
Bigsby over Javonte. And the other issue is Estime might play this week, right, on Thursday, and to gum up the works even more.
Yeah.
Tyler Algier and Zach Charbonnet are actually playing each other this week. Not each other, but their teams are playing each other. Yeah. Algier at home against the Seahawks, which means the Falcons are, Algier at home against the Seahawks, which means Charbonnet is on the road in Atlanta. You can only play one of these guys. Who's it going to be?
Well, I'm going to say Algier is the guy, because, and here's the funny thing. So if you expect Seattle to be playing from behind and Atlanta gets out to a lead, we've seen now that the Falcons like using Algier to, finish out, games when they're in the lead. He seems to be getting a few more touches than Bijan lately. So that's how I would go.
Now, I'll bring this up because I learned this from your podcast, and I can't remember which one of you were brought it up between you, Chris Vaccaro, Dan Williamson, or Matt Modica. But one of you guys said that you noticed that Bijan Robinson's touches were mostly in space, where Algier was getting the touches on the inside because Robinson might be dealing with something.
Yeah, so that was Vaccaro, because him and I were texting back and forth, watching. We're heavily invested in Bijan.
Right.
And so, we're watching these games closely. And what we've noticed is that, like, Bijan, I think he's nursing an injury. So he's been on the injury report with a hammy, and he's been on the injury report with a shoulder. And then the day before, each game, he gets taken off the injury report. But at the end of the day, I still think he's okay to play, but I definitely think that, like, something's bothering him, because he just doesn't have the same explosion that he showed last year. And I think that's what it's stemming from. So, Chris pointed out that, a lot of the runs were to the outside. They didn't want to use him inside, and you're getting hit more with your shoulder and that type of thing. So that's, it's a little bit of, what we noticed, but a little bit of speculation too.
Yeah. And that's so you're saying he's being removed from the injury report, but he's on it all week, but then the last injury report, he's being taken off of it.
Yeah. So like the last 2-3 weeks, he's been on the report with a hammy and shoulder.
Right.
And then, he doesn't have a injury designation going into the week, but he's usually on the report. Like tomorrow, you'll probably see him on the report, shoulder or hammy or whatever, in limited practice. And then they just take him off by Friday.
That's weird. I had not noticed that, but that is interesting.
Yeah.
It's good to know. Let's move on to receivers here, Nelson. Christian Kirk or George Pickens. I feel like we talked a lot about Pickens this show, but we'll talk a little bit more about him now. Pickens Sunday night against the Jets at home. Christian Kirk also at home against the Patriots.
Yeah, we got to go Kirk in the slot. I don't expect the Gonzalez to shadow him. I think that kid's legit. So anytime a receiver is going up against the Patriots, I'm kind of always, a little worried about that. And then Pickens, with the Jets corners are tough. So, and, I don't expect them to force feed Pickens in a game like that, especially when Buffalo just, ran the ball on the Jets. So I expect Pittsburgh to kind of play this ugly football, try to run the ball, play good defense type deal. So I can't play Pickens this week.
Do you think Gonzalez would be matched up against Brian Thomas Jr. most of the game?
I think it depends, with New England's coaching staff, if they think that Gonzalez just needs to play one side, or if they think that they need to, shadow one of the receivers. But I could see them pointing out and saying, like, I mean, Thomas is a rookie, so even though he's been shining, it could be a situation where they don't respect him enough yet to feel like, he should get shadow coverage. So, but at the end of the day, like, Kirk plays the slot, so I think he avoids him.
He would avoid him too. And Thomas obviously underwhelmed this past week, but I'm just thinking, like, as far as, and I know he's not on the question here, but as far as Thomas goes, if I'm breaking ties, should I be breaking them against Brian Thomas this week?
Yeah. Because I'm telling you that, just watching these games, that Gonzalez kid is the next up and coming corner. Like he's legit.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit too, actually. Chris Bird on YouTube, he needs to start two of these guys: Cortland Sutton, Jordan Mason, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Ty Chandler. I'm going to say right now on Tuesday that Aaron Jones is playing this week. If that's the case, I'm eliminating Chandler. If he's not playing, then Ty Chandler and Jordan Mason for me. If Chandler is the backup to Jones, I would go with Jordan Mason and Juju Smith-Schuster, Nelson. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah. Basically, the way I see it is you're not playing Sutton on Thursday night.
Right.
Is I think what we can agree on. You have very good options, and there's still the possibility of Jones not playing, and then Chandler becomes like a must start. So I would just eliminate Sutton and wait till Saturday night, Sunday morning to decide on those calls.
The Vikings play at 1 p.m. on Sunday, so you'll definitely know whether Jones is in or out by then. And Smith-Schuster and Mason play each other at 4:25 that day. So you're golden. You just got to be following it, Chris. Xavier Legette or Christian Watson is the next up here on start or sit. Xavier Legette is going up against the Commanders this week in our nation's capital, whereas Christian Watson is at home against the Houston Texans. Nelson, I love the Packers offense, but I love it as a whole. I don't like the pieces of it too much when it comes to fantasy. And Watson fits that scenario here, which I'm not loving him so much. Legette is interesting. He had the big game 2 weeks ago, and then this past week, I think he got hurt during the game. Did he not?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
No, so my point is here, like, I feel like Legette might have been ready to go on a run here, and this should be a game, a positive game script for him if they're throwing in the second half and Andy Dalton's connecting with them. Whereas I just don't know how involved Watson is going to be in this game, especially with Romeo Doubs back. You have Jaden Reed, Tucker Craftsman, a world eater out there. You have Josh Jacobs. I don't know how much Watson might be the more explosive player, but I think I might trust the volume, or at least the perceived volume of Legette a little bit more.
See, so I'm gonna go the other way. I think Watson's the most explosive player out of these two, and I'm not sure that I feel like Legette is like this solid, like trustworthy option necessarily. Where Watson, he feels more boom or bust, but he showed you last week that all it takes is one play. He gets behind the defense and scores. And I actually think that he's trending up because you got Wicks, who's hurt. I think he's got a shoulder injury. So it's possible that he misses the game. And Jaden Reed also got banged up in that game. He returned, but nevertheless, he's banged up. And I think that this game with Houston could end up being like it's got room for like being a little bit of a shootout.
Yeah.
So I kind of tend to lean Watson there.
Watson, I think no question has the opportunity. Like I think about, was it Dallas last year or 2 years ago where Watson had that breakout 3 touchdown game? It was like a Sunday night game or a Thursday night game.
2 years ago.
I was at the game. I should remember it, and I don't. I just remember that Watson had that big breakout game.
Oh, I remember that one very clearly.
Really?
Yeah. So what? Funny, just quick story.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was I'm at FTN. I told all the subscribers to go pick up Watson. He was coming off of injury. He was dealing with a hamstring, and then I was feeling bullish on Watson, and I told everyone to start Watson, which was a little. It was sketchy to have that much confidence in starting the guy that had, been missing time with a hamstring, and he had that 3 touchdown game against Dallas. So
what made you so confident in Watson that night? First game back.
I had inside knowledge that he was going to be a big part of the game plan.
So there you go. And Watson crushed it this week. Well, listen, you were the Watson whisperer then. I don't know. Maybe Watson is the player over Legette. I think you're right too. Maybe I'm putting too much stock into Legette, being this guy that has a high floor in this game, especially with Deontay Johnson there too.
You got Deontay Johnson there. You got Chuba running the ball well. I don't know. I get it. Like, Packers have Jacobs, but Romeo Doubs, like, really? Like, are we going to say that Doubs is like, commands like all these targets compared
No,
to
I don't.
Davante?
That's the thing with the Packers. I don't think anybody commands targets
Yeah.
on that team. Love just throws to the open guy, and that's why it's spraying around every single game. Which, I mean, if it's a Watson game, it's going to be huge, and so maybe he's the play there. DeAndre Hopkins or Tyler Lockett, two guys that have been around the block a few times, is next here. Lockett at Atlanta, DeAndre Hopkins at Buffalo. So they're both on the road here. Lockett did have a pretty good game against San Francisco last time out. Hopkins, this Tennessee offense in general gives me pause. Buffalo is working on the short night or the short week, at least playing on Monday Night Football. So there's something to be said for that. Where do you stand on this one? Hopkins versus Lockett.
I can't play Hopkins. Levis looks so bad. I think also that shoulder injury is affecting him because, just watching his throws, it didn't have. He's got a strong arm, and he had like no zip on the ball this past Sunday. And actually, Buffalo's secondary is like supposed to be pretty decent. I mean, Lazard and Wilson kind of, had a pretty good day against them last night. But I would go Lockett. I don't see how like you can start Hopkins with any confidence.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's not an indictment of Hopkins. It's more of an indictment, number one, on Levis, and then number two on Levis's injury. And I think that's why we go with Lockett here. Moving on to tight ends. Let's talk tight ends here for a second. Again, assume FFPC tight end premium on this. So we are looking at, for the first one, Hunter Henry, who is going up against the Jaguars in Jacksonville, or Isaiah Likely, who is also playing in Florida, but he is at Tampa. Which one is the right one there?
So we're talking about Hunter Henry or the second round pick, Isaiah Likely?
Right, exactly. Scott Hoyt, by the way, Scott Hoyt is watching on YouTube right now, and I know he was a big Likely guy after that opening round.
No.
Game.
No.
Yeah. So I know he's big.
I'm sorry, Scott.
He's big. He's big on Likely. Henry or Likely here is the choice. I feel like the way you're setting me up, it's probably Hunter Henry.
I think it's Henry.
Jackson. I mean, like that New England Jacksonville game, the total on that is 42.5, and I feel like it should be higher because it's two bad teams getting together, and I just feel like when two bad teams get together, it's just a high scoring game.
Yeah.
I do like Hunter Henry a little bit more than Likely there. Likely, for whatever reason, just and now we're seeing Mark Andrews have a good game. It's
and that's the thing. It looks like Mark Andrews is starting to come around.
Yeah, Scott, of course, is playing Likely here, as he says on YouTube.
I mean, Scott, I'm playing my second round pick too.
Who's your second round pick?
My second round pick?
Oh, just in general, you're saying.
I'm just saying in general, like I'm not sitting my second round pick. So
yes,
you gotta just live and die with your second round pick at this point.
We're having fun with you, Scott. Let's move on.
Sorry.
Noah Fant, and Mike Gesicki. Noah Fant at Atlanta this week. Mike Gesicki at Cleveland. Gesicki last week, I believe, put up a bagel. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah. Here's the thing: the Eric Balkman is starting to come along, and Gesicki's not a very good run blocker. He's not good, in the run game and stuff. So I think his snaps are going to start going lower and lower. So I would lean Noah Fant. Not that I'm not bullish on Fant, but I would go with Fant.
For what it's worth, Scott did pick Likely in the third round as opposed to the second round.
That's better.
So let's complete value now.
I got to calm down.
Eric, all 2 catches for 10 yards last week, too. And you're right, he might be coming on there. So we are going with Noah Fant, who actually had, I believe, a 6-catch game on Thursday night against San Francisco, too.
Yeah.
Colby Parkinson or Jonnu Smith is the last of the tight ends I want to get through here tonight. Jonnu Smith at the Colts, Colby Parkinson at home against the Raiders. The return of Cooper Kupp, I think, muddies this. Normally, I would say Parkinson over Smith. But Smith is coming off the bye. It's at Indianapolis. I don't know. We're looking for silver linings here. I don't really like either one of these guys. Nelson, are you leaning any which way?
I think on Wednesday night, I'm going to spend over $100 and try to get Calcaterra.
Calcaterra over both of those guys. Yeah.
Yes.
There you go. Yeah. Would you play Jatavian Sanders over both those guys?
I would.
Okay.
I would. Yeah.
So
those guys, man, that's rough. if Cooper Kupp's out, I would go Parkinson.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. We've been ripping on Scott quite a bit. Let's answer his question. Quarterback this week, he has to either play Kyler Murray or Jared Goff, which is the one that we're looking at here. Murray at home against the Chargers. Jared Goff is in that Minnesota game in the Twin Cities.
Yeah, you can't play Kyler. Kyler, he's sitting his little ass down on my bench. I'm playing Goff in a potentially high-scoring back-and-forth game.
Yeah, it's weird to think about this, but like if Harrison is out, maybe it's a Connor game where it's just Connor and McBride, and it's a knock down, drag him out type game with Los Angeles, who loves to run the ball and play defense. And maybe it's just not a Murray game, whereas Goff could be in that fantasy bonanza. So yeah, Goff is the play there. What about Kyler Murray or Geno Smith? Are we still going Geno Smith?
Geno,
okay.
Yeah.
Here's a fun one. Patrick Mahomes or Kirk Cousins. Mahomes at San Francisco. Kirk Cousins, again, in that big game against Seattle, which we said, I believe, was the second highest total of the week. Kirk Cousins at home against Seattle, or Mahomes. Who would you play?
That's so sad that we're at this point where we're debating Mahomes with really any quarterback.
And Mahomes is undefeated too, which is crazy.
Man, oh man. Against San Fran. Again, I can see that game. So I'm very big into when I make my lineup calls, I kind of project like the game script and kind of like how I forecast these games going. And I really could see that game as being a dud where like it's just kind of like the defenses kind of take control because they're both pretty good defenses.
Right.
Or it could be a shootout. Cousins, he's starting to look good. And I don't think that matchup is so bad. I think, Seattle's banged up right now on defense. So that is a close call. I'd probably just go Mahomes.
I usually break ties in favor of Mahomes, but it gets now. What if you get up into the area? Like, what about Sam Darnold? What about Baker Mayfield versus Mahomes?
Oh, I'm playing Darnold and Mayfield.
Not even close.
That's not close to me.
Okay.
I mean, Mayfield, isn't he like the number one scoring quarterback?
I think he might be
fantasy.
I'd have to look it up.
What the hell? Like,
yeah.
I mean, at some point, we can say like, oh, small sample size after 2 weeks, but we're in week 7. If Baker is the number one fantasy scoring quarterback, you just play him. Like there's not a lineup call anymore. Like I take it back. There is a lineup call because Baker was like a free agent pickup pretty much in every league. And you could have Lamar Jackson and you could have Jaden Daniels, and it's not so obvious to go Baker. But outside of like those guys, like you got to go Baker.
Would you, if it's Darnold or Mayfield, would you play Mayfield over Darnold this week?
Yeah.
We got another receiver question here in the YouTube chat. Paul and Boats, Christian Kirk or Romeo Doubs this week? We talked about both these offenses, but what if we compare Kirk and Doubs? We said Watson over Leggett, but what if we compare these two guys?
I mean, I don't think Kirk has really been setting the world on fire.
He hasn't been. It could be a big blowout game or a big shootout game, beg your pardon, in Lambeau against the Texans.
I probably lean Dobbs because I think Wicks is banged up. I think Reed is banged up. And if I'm predicting that game turns into a shootout, so I'd lean Dobbs.
I will. Yeah, it's close. I think I'm going to lean Dobbs as well. For the point. I mean, I guess like I know Wicks is not playing this game, or I'm really, really certain he's not playing this game, and that should be enough right there. And if Reed is involved, then that's the cherry on top for starting Romeo Doubs over Christian Kirk as well.
This one's throwing me off. The Purdy revenge game.
Yeah. So was he like signed by the Chiefs or something? I don't understand this.
That one I don't know if that was the case. If he was on the Chiefs roster, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, no, he was drafted by the
49ers, right?
Yeah. So I don't
In the same draft with Trey Lance.
Right. Yeah, I don't get it. Okay. I don't know. Liv, you can explain that to us later. Nelson, so good to have you on tonight. I learned a lot. You have influenced the way I'm going to set my lineups and bid on my players this week for sure. Where can people continue to consume more Nelson Sousa content?
At FTN Fantasy. Got the high stakes package there. And, now we're well into the season, but I have my fab article that I put out every week with dollar amounts for, if you're in a fab, only league. And then I have the Discord chat, which has access to me 24/7. So you can ask, lineup questions, trade questions, pretty much anything. And, I answer everyone's question. And I try to get to it, in a short period of time, definitely less than 24 hours.
You're the man. He's a man of the people. And oh, by the way, the Fantasy Empire podcast with Chris Vaccaro, Dan Williamson, and Matt Modica, which comes out weekly as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Matt Deutsch pointing out it's a Brock Purdy revenge game because he lost to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. That's
okay.
The revenge
there you go.
So it's just a total Niners revenge game.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Gotcha.
We will continue to follow Nelson, you on X at @thefranchise_12. We'll continue to check out everything you're doing for FTN Fantasy and, of course, listening to the Fantasy Empire podcast. Good luck in all your leagues. Continue to crush it, my friend, and good luck in trying to win that $1 million in the FFPC again this year. Thanks so much for hanging out.
Thank you, man. Appreciate having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Remember, FFPC Weekly Challenge, myffpc.com. I want to thank Nelson Sousa and Matt Deutsch. We are back this Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Corbin Young from Rotoballer will be my guest co-host. It's going to be a good one for Nelson Sousa and Matt Deutsch. I'm Eric Balkman. This has been the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.